Good evening. We are here to do an essay written by Arvind Krishna Mehrotra from The Emperor Has No Clothes, 1982. This is an interesting essay because it talks about how different languages work in the mind of a bilingual or multilingual poet. Intriguingly interesting because A.K. Mehrotra has this very special tongue in cheek humor, sometimes savage, sometimes blasting a contrary opinion to smithereens, sometimes withering it into oblivion, all done so subtly that you're tickled by it and barely stop yourself from laughing out aloud many times while reading it. A.K. Mehrotra was born in the year of India's independence in 1947. The year has been hailed by many as the year of portents, angels, and monsters. For India, that is, Amit Chaudhary, the editor of this book of modern Indian literature, calls him neither an angel nor a monster, but a hyphenated mutation. Among the many reasons to lament about the new India is the sorry state of its literary criticism, especially when it is about that body of literature, recent in history, born out of the union of the two huge cultures of the world, the English and the Indian. That is Indian writing in English. Those poets and authors who are born Tamil, Kannada, Odia, Bengali, Marathi, etc., but can express themselves just as well in the alien tongue, that language that is acquired, learnt, and not the language or gibberish that all children learn in their mother's arms, the mother tongue, as it is called. Let us split the essay into three parts. Number one would be when we talk about Arvind Krishna Mehrotra's very savage riposts to fellow poet R. Parthasarathi. Riposte is a sharp retort to an insult or to humiliation. The second part will be to deal with how critics see the positioning of different languages in a multilingual sensibility. Esperantists and polyglots are often mentioned in this essay. Underlying every Esperanto enthusiast is the Esperantist ideal that the world would be a better place if everyone could understand each other better. Esperanto is an international auxiliary language designed to aid global communication. A polyglot can effectively communicate in several languages. Now, these are terms which I'm emphasizing upon because A.K. Mehrotra has mentioned these terms quite frequently, especially in keeping with the tone of the essay, because it is dealing with the multilingual sensibility of poets and writers. Now, the third portion that we're going to touch upon is how the emperor has no clothes actually to drape. If you refer to the title of the essay, The Emperor Has No Clothes. Now, we'll go back to it towards the end of the discussion. Now, it is all about the perspective. Indian writing in English is as yet on unsteady ground. Much clarity and value could be added to this body of writing if letters that were written between poets and writers in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and the 80s could be published. One such letter that A.K. Mehrotra uses to bring clarity to much of his argument in this essay is the one written by R. Parthasarathi, a poet, to Jayanta Mahapatra, another poet, in the year 1979. The letter was written to express his disapproval of a piece published in Chandrabhaga, a journal of which the editor was Jayanta Mahapatra. The controversial piece was written by Sri Ravi S. Mishra of Sambalpur, who had spoken about the intellectual thinness of A.K. Ramanujan's poetry and the fact that they dealt with very narrow themes and were not world angst encompassing. The phrase intellectually thin had been used for Ramanujan a few years prior by S. Nagarajan, But that was not the point of contest here. Mehrotra's bone of contention was the stance taken by Parthasarathi to validate his point. He felt that since Ramanujan, as a Kannada Tamil native speaker, had access to the anterior, within quotes, the anterior tradition of the classics of India, so he should be accepted without question as superior. He repossessed the past of his family because of the special right of birth. Mehrotra considered that to be a slight of the other native speakers and poets of India, uh, those who trace their language to both Indo Aryan and Dravidian languages. Especially more so because Ramanujan himself, in his introduction to poem Speaking of Siva, admits to having tried to map medieval Kannada onto the sound look of modern English. He makes special mention of the word tries, thus making Parthasarathis claim of supposed smooth repossession of the anterior tradition rather inane. There is much mention of responsible criticism by which, according to the author, is lacking in Parthasarathis almost threatening, bullying, street hoodlum type of bashing of any opinion which doesn't sync with his opinion. Octavio Paz, a Mexican poet, has mourned the lack of Hispano American literature because there is an antagonism between the two instead of a need to regard it as a single body of literature with negotiable differences. There is a necessity to place works among close relatives. In Ramanujan's case, among other works written by Tamil Brahmins, Pune Parsis, Goan Catholics, as well as distant relatives like the Jesuits, the Jesuits are the Roman Catholics, WASP, the white Anglo Saxon Protestants, and even among the Mormons. He has been called jingoistic, provincial, contradictory by Mehrotra in many ways. Parthasarathi has been called so. Ezra Pound, in his 1917 essay, defined this very unpleasant practice of ignoring the other's manners, customs, habits, culture, and a tendency to club everything under a common universal pattern. Parthasarathis' similar approach is similar. He is aggrieved about Ramanujan's poetry being pitted against English poets and believes that cultural context used by Indian poets writing in English should only adhere to stock metaphors, folk tales, etc. of Indian context. A.K. Mehrotra brings in the American literary critic George Steiner, who talks about the multilingual sensibilities of Vladimir Nabokov, who lived between 1899 to 1977, to Samuel Beckett, and to George Louis Borges. These poets were born Russian, Spanish, etc., and adapted an alien tongue. The French, the presence of French, English, German presses upon Borges's Spanish. He uses the Vulgate. The Vulgate is the Latin form of the Bible, and the Argentine mythology to give credibility to his writing that might seem too convoluted and foreign otherwise, because of the presence of these other languages filtering into his Spanish. Nabokov writes in American English upon which the native Russian is a significant presence. So these poets, according to Steiner, enrich their writings by allowing a process of osmosis or reticulation, the action of reticulation, networking within the works from other languages that you might know, rather than doing what Parthasarathi advocates, which is either it is my way or the highway. In other words, write an Indian poem in English that in a typical Indian manner with no infiltration from other languages that you might know. That's when the that's when the way these languages are arranged in a multilingual sensibility is brought into context. Are they in layers, which makes one step down a layer or two in order to derive the past essences, as Ramanujan is assumed to have done with his poems, as Parthasarathi feels? Or is there an osmosis happening, filtering through and influencing each other, enriching and making it unique enough, and thus stabilizing the entire body of Indian writing in English to be an individual and authentic piece of work or body of writing, as individual and authentic as is Bengali or, for that matter, French? By following the rigid pattern of Parthasarathi, we are introduced to the story of Buridan's ass. Buridan's ass is an illustration of a paradox in philosophy in the conception of free will. It refers to a hypothetical situation wherein an ass, a donkey, that is equally hungry and thirsty is placed precisely midway between a stack of hay and a pail of water. Since the paradox assumes the donkey will always go to whichever is closer, it dies of both hunger and thirst, since it cannot make any rational decision between the hay and water. The paradox is named after the 14th century French philosopher Jean Buridan, whose philosophy of moral determinism is it satirizes actually. Same might happen to poets who know many languages and are allowed to use only one with its entire cultural enormity. Why shouldn't Arun Kolatkar write in his own style of Marathi English and Bombay Hindi, Jayanta Mahapatra in Odia English, or Ramanujan in Kannada Tamil English? Is what Mehrotra wants to talk about. A.K. Mehrotra even talks about Kafka, who admitted to his German being foreign capital, which had not been earned but boisterously or secretly or even masochistically appropriated. Because his father was brought up a German speaking Jewish Czech, never quite mastered German, and his son, our Franz Kafka, was aware too that he was a foreigner to the language. How powerful language is evident in the complexities involved in the multilingual sensibility. How do the different languages reside on this very delicately positioned sensibility? Whether it is a bed upon which languages deposit their silt and they are thus layered and stratified. If that is so, how it is then, if that is how it is then, it is very sad because the impact of this multilingual experience will only be superficial, rather redundant. If, on the other hand, this sensibility is regarded as a crucible in which languages change, take on the color and property of the other, like in a chemistry lab, impact will be far more enriching and enhancing. Only due to this molecular transformation do the writings of Nabokov, Borges, Kulatkar, Mahapatra, Ramanujan emerge with a mysterious balance as described by Alistair Reid about Borges. Reid says about Borges, these are very beautiful lines. This is a direct quotation from his essay. I always think of Borges occupying that nether world of the translator and the bilingual backstage in the great silence behind language, taking his careful daily walk from the silence to the word, to the sentence, to the book, to the library, and then back again. What can possibly be a better tribute to the struggling multilingual writer? Provincialism in the name of anterior tradition is a crass defense of a poet who does not even need that kind of defense. We're talking about Ramanujan here. Now, to bring this to a close, we must refer to the title of the essay and whether there is a need to drape the emperor with garments of any kind. There could be two reasons for A.K. Mehrotra to title the essay thus: The Emperor Has No Clothes. Either he wants to affirm his boldness to be able to say what the others can't. Like the little boy in the story by Hans Andersen Christian, an emperor and an entire body of citizens of a kingdom who fell to the trickery of two tailors who promised a fantastic garment which only those worthy people could see and the unworthy wouldn't. Nobody wanted to be declared unworthy, so they played along except for the little boy astride on his dad's shoulders to view the pageantry of the emperor's new clothes. Free of biases and fear, he shouted out that the emperor has no clothes. That is, he was naked. Keeping this story in mind, the essay could be an assertion of A.K. Mehrotra's ability to call a spade, or maybe he actually meant that the body of Indian writing in English is so inviolate and unique that it requires no dyeing of any sort, no draping of any sort to explain its authentic identity. It is for you to take on from here. Thank you. I hope you will reach out to me.